someone who's pretty new to this whole YouTube thing and not seen too many smartphones, it's really nice to see a smartphone cost a fair chunk less than £200 but still try and look and feel premium. Now, the Realme C35 seems to fit that description, but I'm here to find out if the rest of the phone stacks up as well. And this isn't my first Realme review. I've also done the Realme 7 and the Realme 8 5G, but don't worry if you haven't seen them, nobody else did either. But just in case you're curious, I'll put the links down in the description for both of those videos. Now, of course, for that low price tag, you do have to set your expectations accordingly. And as far as the design goes, it's obvious from the get-go that it does borrow inspiration from the iPhone 12 series, even down to the flat sides and those elongated power buttons. In some areas, it does look like the iPhone 12, even down to that green color. But then we have to get back down to earth and realize that this is a £150 smartphone. And of course, the back is made of polycarbonate plastic instead of glass, but it does have a nice reflective finish. That is something nice at this price point. Even down to that camera layout, with the exception of that third smaller lens on the right, it is looking a lot like the iPhone 12. And this triple camera system is headlined by a 50 megapixel f1.8 primary camera with phase detection autofocus. The second is a 0.3 megapixel depth sensor. And then you have a 2 megapixel macro camera, which of course screams budget, which is what you do expect for this low price. But to give Realme its credit, the phone does look really nice, but it does feel cheap, and it is obvious that the back and the sides are made of plastic. The large 5000 mAh battery is a great addition, but the pretty mediocre 18-watt charging won't get you charged up very fast. But luckily, because of that battery size, it will get you a full day, no problem. And performance is pretty basic on the C35. It comes with a Unisoc Tiger T616 processor, which is an area that Realme definitely cut corners to keep the price down. It is a decent processor for everyday use, but graphic intense games will struggle, and it isn't the most power efficient. It's built on a slightly older 12 nanometer fabrication over the 8 or 6 nanometers of Snapdragon and MediaTek processors as well, so you won't get that efficiency that you would get from those processors. And this is backed up by 4 or 6 gigabytes of RAM with either 64 or 128 gigabytes of UFS 2.2 storage. So it's not the faster UFS 3 or 3.1 storage, but it's still decent enough for everyday use. For software, the Realme C35 is running the older Android 11 with Realme UI R Edition on top. This is basically a trimmed down version of their Realme UI for their budget devices, and it has a more stock Android feel to it, something that I did notice from the get-go. There are only a couple of preloaded games. I just uninstalled them pretty quickly. It's not an issue for me too much. And as for the display, you get a gorgeous 6.6 inch Full HD display, sadly with just a 60 Hz refresh rate, and this is using Panda Glass. Now, it uses the same technology as Gorilla Glass, so you do get a decent amount of protection, but it's likely to be slightly lower than Gorilla Glass because it is a little bit cheaper. But you do get a pre-applied screen protector on the Realme C35, so straight out the box, you haven't got to worry about the screen scratching or anything like that. And as for the refresh rate, as someone that uses an iPhone 11 Pro Max with a 60 Hz refresh rate, the fact that it doesn't have a high refresh rate display isn't the end of the world for me. The only downside is that you can buy other smartphones at very similar prices to the Realme C35 that do come with high refresh rate displays. So if you are someone that is used to using high refresh rate displays, this is probably going to be a deal breaker for you. But other than that, the display is really nice. It's not the brightest, but it's a really nice looking display. Outdoor visibility is pretty good. It's not, again, the brightest, but then you never do find that on budget devices anyway. I haven't really got any complaints about the display on the Realme C35, aside from maybe that high refresh rate display. And up in the top center of the display, you get an 8 megapixel selfie camera, which produces some pretty decent photos. There is noticeable skin smoothing on the photos that you do find with other Chinese brands. Other than that, it's not too bad. Typical budget quality selfie camera. That's about all I can say, really. Now, as for main camera performance, for me, it's typical budget quality. Color is okay, although it does look quite flat in a few photos, and it doesn't always capture a lot of detail, especially in some photos of plants. The leaves can look quite smooth. There are also a couple of instances in portrait mode where there was a bit of haloing around my body. You can tell that a lot of extra processing has gone into this photo. It's a HDR situation where the phone has to control the bright sun and try and keep everything exposed correctly. and it struggled in this particular situation. And one thing to note, sadly the selfie camera doesn't support portrait mode. This is likely down to the Unistop processor inside, but may also be a decision Realme made not to include it. But to its credit, the Realme C35 in non-HDR situations is perfectly capable of producing some pretty decent snaps. Absolutely fine for posting on social media or anything like that. But the 50 megapixel spec, unfortunately, I don't think is enough to sell it as a great camera. And video on the main camera tops out at 1080p at 30 FPS and 720p at 30 FPS on the selfie camera. And unsurprisingly, there's no video stabilization here. It is typical budget quality video, nothing that's worth raving about, but it will get you some okay home movies if that's all you're going to be shooting. So what's my verdict on the Realme C35? Well, if you take away the shortcomings of the mediocre performance, the 60Hz display and the up and down camera experience, there is a lot to like about the Realme C35. Although 60Hz, the display is still really nice and performance is absolutely fine for most people if you're not an intense gamer or anything like that. And if you want a phone that will take some pretty decent photos a lot of the time in all but the trickiest of situations, you'll be absolutely fine with the Realme C35. And also you can't really deny that it looks pretty cool too. But for a very similar price, you can get last year's Realme 8 5G, which comes with a 90Hz display, a more powerful 5G processor in the Dimensity 700, up to 8GB of RAM, and a higher resolution 16 megapixel selfie camera with 1080p video recording. The downside is obviously it's older, so it may not get the newest software updates, but I personally think that might still be a better buy than the Realme C35. Either way, the assumption of paying less money for a smartphone and getting poor specs is definitely gone. And for the low price of £140, you are getting a pretty decent smartphone and it will be absolutely fine for a lot of people. So let me know in the comments what you think of the Realme C35. Is it a phone that you would consider buying? And thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy videos like this, and I will see you in the next one.